Okay, let's have a quick look at masking. I'm going to bring in a image that I've created. First of all, let's make sure that our image is going to be big enough. And by doing this, I'm going to create a new document, File, New. Make sure it's international paper, A4. If you do have the option, some versions will have the option of choosing landscape or portrait. I'm going to hit OK, and let's bring this in as is. So I'm going to grab my image and drag it in. There it is, and it's fitted quite nicely into A4. It's nice, it's a high resolution image. We've got a lot of detail in here, and this is one of the reasons why you want to make sure your image is sufficient by dragging into an A4 document so we can check our resolution. It is a smart object, which is kind of cool. At some point we're going to have to rasterize this, so it is large at the moment, which is great. So I'm going to rasterize this straight away. I'm going to right click on that, go to rasterize layer. Other option is to go to layer, rasterize, smart object, but right clicking is nice and easy for that. So it gets rid of that little box there, so we can do some proper editing on this. You could always duplicate this if you want. I'm going to go straight ahead though, and I'm going to try and figure out how I'm going to select this object. Now, lasso tool's not going to be great for this. You know, it's going to be pretty tricky to cut all this out. It'd be better if it was like a box or something like that. But in this case, we're going to jump straight into using the quick selection tool. Magic Wand tool's not going to be that handy for us. You know, that's great for selecting big blocks of color. If you hold down Shift, it'll expand it out. You might be able to get there, but Control D to deselect. I'm going to go quick selection tool. This works really well in a lot of cases. Once again, you've got the chance for sample all layers and auto enhance, but we've only got one layer at the moment really, so it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to click, and with this you want to start in the middle. Now don't forget you can adjust your brush sides, square brackets, left or right, but you know, if you do need to get some detail, and start in the middle and then start pushing it outwards, and it might just jump and take a whole lot of sections. And in this case the background's pretty stark, so it's you know, easy to grab a contrast to there. If we're missing some areas, let's zoom in. Well, it's decided to stop at a high contrast area in the ear here. We want to add that ear, so I'm going to click and push that out. Okay, and same with this ear here. And quite often the auto enhance is going to help us out a little bit there. It's missing out some hair bits here, but you know, that's going to be tricky to do to break apart. So I'm just going to push that out a little bit more and have a quick look around to make sure it's a decent mask. Now, if we do want to remove some areas, we can simply hold down Alt, and that'll bring up, you notice up the top here it goes to the negative one, bring up the negative brush, and we can push those back. So that's pretty good. So if we wanted to get rid of that blue area and push that out, if it goes too far you can add and subtract and push it forwards and backwards. This one's pretty straightforward, so you know, if you do come across one that's more complex, you know, you may have to do some more playing around with it than I've done basically. Control Alt Z to keep stepping backwards if you make, you know, multiple mistakes, but you know, give it a go, push it around. And once we've got that selected, we're going to do something rather important. We want to kick out the background. That's reasonable as a quick mask. We're missing a bit of the hair there. Quickly hit that, and I'm going to mask this. So we've got an option to hit select and mask here, and that's going to take us straight into a mask mode. I'm going to hit cancel on that, because we can go into a mask mode with just about any form of selection, whether it be through the marquee tool, the lasso tool, and that is below our layers panel, rectangle with a circle in it. Click on that, and that's going to mask out the background. And we can see there as our mask there, and if we look closely, anything that is pure black is going to be invisible, anything pure white is going to be visible. Now make sure you realize that you can select between the image and the mask. If we right click on the mask, I can do things like disable it, so you can now see the background, or enable, or we can delete it if we don't like it, or apply a layer mask. Now we do have some options that we can do in repairing this. If we zoom in again, I'm going to have a look at the hair specifically. We'll notice that there are some issues. We're not be able to see through the hair there. It's kind of cut out rather scruffily. So not very, very well done for that. What I like to do is create a new layer underneath. So this is our little new layer button here, and I'm going to fill this in with a solid color. I'm going to go grab my paint bucket here. Shortcut is G. Again, you do have the gradient tool and the 3D material drop tool, but paint bucket is what we want. I'm going to pick up something rather contrasting, like a bright red. Usually works quite well. Or let's go something, actually let's go a bright green for this, and I'm going to click it in there. So that's going to help us show where there's some issues popping up, because white works, but our background is already kind of white, so we're sort of starting to see where the error issues are a bit more. Now, quickly sliding back to our mask right there, we can always adjust our mask. It's one of the cool things about it is we can reapply it and play with it. So I'm going to grab my brush. Shortcut is B. Don't forget, you do have a big selection of brushes here, and we can adjust the brush size and stuff like that. And when we're selected in the mask, remember, in the mask, not the image, and we select on pure white works and it makes everything visible. So I can brush over that mask area, and we can see that that is turning that essentially mask area, and you can see it's sort of taking effect there, completely visible using white. If I switch over to black, and I can swap these, or I can click on and change it black. Shortcut to switch over your two selection colors is X. So X as a shortcut, switch to black, and anything black becomes invisible. So I can turn whatever I want invisible from there. In between, if I click on there and choose, let's just say I'm going to choose a mid-range red in this case, you'll notice that the color doesn't actually become red, it becomes a mid-range gray. And the reason for that is when we're dealing with masks, it's only white, black and grayscales. And because it's a mid-range, I can paint that over, and you'll notice that it has basically almost a 50% transparency on it. So depending on our grayscales is depending on how visible or invisible that is. So that's very important to keep track of. So why mask it? Why not just erase it or delete the background? Well, this is the reason why. I can go to my mask and I can double click on that, and this will open up in a special mask panel. Now we've got the properties over here, and make sure you're aware that you can scroll up and down. These controls have increased over the years, and the first one to look at is the view portal over here, and it's dropped down. So don't just go with what's automatically there, have a look at it. Remember, I did drop a green panel, and have a look at this transparency option. So if I push the transparency down, we don't see where anything's quite masked out. We see the background. If I push it up, we can see basically where it's been masked out. A few different other options. Marching ants, haven't really used that very often. Overlay is a nice important one. It puts like a red colorization over it, especially if you've got a busy background. It does really help. On black, which is actually quite a good one for this, when you push the opacity up. On white, which is what we had previously, and black and white, whoop, there he is, which is actually a very important one, and I'll show you why shortly. And on layers, which means you're going to be able to see what's on everything. So cycle through these and figure out what's going to be the best one for you to figure out what the hell is happening. So I'm going to go on onion skinning, and I'm going to have a quick play around with that. So if I zoom in, let's focus in on the hair here. Transparency is 100%. We can't really see these hair follicles here. If I push this back, we can start seeing them. So I'm going to get my transparency so I can see what is going on here. And now let's have a look at these tools. So very first tool up here, this is our quick selection tool. If I hover over that, hopefully it should come up. There we go, quick selection tool, and it works the same as the quick selection tool outside of the area. It allows us to push around and pick up some areas. So I'm going to try and pick up some of these hair follicle areas, like so. Oop, gone a bit far, Control Z. So again, it's about subtlety. If it decides that there's nothing worth looking at, it'll push it out a bit further than it needs to. Holding down Alt's going to allow you to push back in, subtract, but you know it's going to get a little bit finicky. So that's really good, and especially if we're missing areas. So let's say we wanted to get rid of this area here. I can hold down Alt and push that back in, and it's gonna clear up that little hair at the back. And again, it's relying on contrasts to sort of figure this stuff out. So once we've got it, we've aided our selection a little bit here. We've picked up a bit of the hair here. Next one we're going to have a look at is this one here. This is the Refine Edge tool. And this is going to start making further decisions. And I'm going to get a fairly large brush for this, and particularly for hair and stuff like that. And I'm just going to sort of start brushing it around the outside. And it does a pretty good job in most cases. You can see here it's starting to push back. And you don't want to take it too far, otherwise it's going to, it's going to start making parts that are invisible. Which will start showing through, like I've just chomped off a big bit of the ear there, for example. Most of this should be pretty good, and I've just gone through there, and that's, it's done a decent enough job on a quick cursory part. Again, this is quite a simple background, so be aware of it. So I'm just going to push that transparency up. If it goes too far, remember, hold down Alt to subtract. Maybe reduce the brush size, try again, back and forth. Now there's some further controls in this. Edge detection, we can turn on smart radius, and we can play around with that. We also have smoothing effect, and I'm doing a screen recording, so this might have a bit of lag on it. Whenever you do a screen recording, it does seem to slow stuff down, which it is at the moment. You've also got some options like feather, which is going to kind of blur it out. Contrast, again, sometimes it gets a bit pixelated though. And shift edge, so we can push where it's selected in or out. So if it's getting too far or too close, we can do that. Once you've had a play around with that, do have a look at the different options here. So have a look at overlay, see if there's any issues coming up as well. Have a look at on black as well, and then start seeing if you can fix that up a bit. Maybe you need to shift the edge and stuff like that, and do your repairs. So quick look at overlay here. I am getting some weird areas popping up here. I'm getting too much popping up here, so I'm going to try and take some of that back, which can be a little bit tricky to do. And then finally, I'm going to assume that I've done this to a better degree. I'm going to go to black and white. And black and white's a really important one, especially to try and finish your stuff off. If we have a quick look in here, and this isn't too bad, but there are some issues. This big area here, remember, anywhere that's black or grey is going to become partially invisible, and we don't really want, this is part of the head, we don't want that invisible there. So I'm going to go back to my quick selection tool or my brush tool and start brushing that back in. Again, square brackets to make it bigger, Alt to change it from black to white, and I'm going to try and clean up some of the areas that I think, drop the hardness down, need to be fixed up. Now we can do this with the quick selection tool as well. It might just do it, but it also can push it out a bit. But it's a matter of being discerning for that. We want to kick out any areas that sort of don't need to be, might be hitting the invisible side, but don't need to be. So we want a good selection there, and we can start moving that button. And eventually we hit OK, and that's not too bad. There's still a few issues here. Probably clean up a little bit on there. Kick out the green, and we can start seeing that's looking a little bit better. There are some ways of refining this further and adding some color overlays and stuff, especially if you're using green screen. You can get some issues happening there, but practice getting that. We do want to make sure that our master copy is really well depatched. So do go through this thing as often as possible. Make sure you get a really good depatch. If we have a look there's some issues. So back and forth, back and forth. Spend some time on it, get it done properly, and because this is going to be the cornerstone for the rest of our images to work from. One more thing I'm going to have quickly show you guys is, maybe we want to just finish this off a bit. But I still have the link on this. I'm going to just shrink this guy down a bit. Control T, and again holding down Shift to scale that. Hit Enter, and I'm going to just quickly grab the ellipse tool, and I want to sort of create a bit of a close off for where the neck is, like so. So I'm selecting that circle. I'm going to go make sure I'm selected on my mask and go B for brush, and I want to make this outside shoulder part invisible so it looks a bit more stylized. So I'm going to go make sure I've got black selected. Now the problem is that I'm erasing inside the circle, and I actually want to erase outside the circle. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to Select, Inverse, and this is a really important one to try and remember. So Shift Control or Shift Command if you're on the Mac, I for inverse, and you'll see there's marching ants on the outside. And what that allows me to do is I can now paint in that there, Control D to deselect, and that's sort of curved off the edges there a bit. So you could look at doing something like that, or perhaps you want to do like a nice sort of feather it out really softly with a nice soft brush, like so. Now remember, cool thing with using masks is it doesn't destroy our object. If at some point we've decided, you know what, I'm happy with this, I'm ready to leave as is, we can simply right click on that and apply layer mask, and then we just end up with the solid image, no mask applied, and we can further mask or do whatever we need to with that. So really important one. We do need to get a really good mugshot to start with before we do some alterations, and this is a great way of doing it. Stay tuned, got another technique for doing this as well, so keep an eye out for the next video.